It's a school day, but today is different. In the hallway, gunfire rings out. Before you can react, a man in a balaclava shoots a guard and a cleaner. Your classmates dive under desks as he moves from room to room, screaming and firing. You watch him climb to the next floor, and then suddenly, he turns the gun on himself. Welcome to the disturbing school shooting Iceberg. Tier 1, Columbine High School Massacre. On April 20, 1999, Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado, became the site of a tragedy that would set the blueprint for school shootings across the world. That morning, while most students carried books and backpacks, two 12th graders, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, walked in armed to the teeth. Between them, they carried shotguns, a carbine rifle, a Tech-9 pistol, and duffel bags packed with propane bombs. Just before 11 a.m., they slipped into the cafeteria and planted the bombs, carefully setting the timers to go off during lunch break when they knew the cafeteria would be packed. The idea was that the explosions would kill hundreds, and anyone who survived would be gunned down as they tried to escape. They went back outside to their cars and waited. At 11:17 a.m., nothing happened. The bombs didn't go off. Since their original plan had fallen apart, Harris and Klebold decided it was time for Plan B. They pulled out their guns and walked towards the school's west entrance. Minutes later, they opened fire on students eating lunch outside. One was killed instantly. Another was wounded, and panic spread quickly across the campus. From there, the chaos moved inside. They shot into classrooms and hallways, tossing pipe bombs as they went. A teacher, who first thought they were filming a video project or pulling some type of prank, quickly realized the truth when a bullet shattered a window and struck a student. She ran into the library, instructed everyone there to hide under the tables, and then called 911. By 11:29, Harris and Klebold were in the library themselves. 52 students, 2 teachers, and 2 librarians were crammed inside, trying to stay silent. For the next 7 minutes, the gunmen mocked and taunted their classmates before firing at random. 10 students were killed in that room alone. When they left the library, they moved back through the cafeteria and hallways, setting small fires and blasting at walls and ceilings in search of more victims. At 12:02 p.m., they returned to the library. Police were outside now, exchanging gunfire with them through the windows. 6 minutes later, the school went silent. Harris and Klebold had turned their weapons on themselves. In less than an hour, 13 people were dead, and 23 others were injured. Columbine wasn't the first school shooting in America, but it became the most infamous because of how brutal it was, how much planning went into it, and the fact that the whole thing played out live on national TV. It shocked the country, reshaped how schools prepared for violence, and inspired a disturbing wave of copycats. As of 2024, the Columbine Massacre has been directly linked to more than 50 other mass shootings all over the world, leaving over 300 people dead and more than 500 others injured. In one of them, which we'll get to in Tier 3, the shooter even dressed like Eric Harris on purpose. Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. December 14, 2012, should have been another quiet morning in Newton, Connecticut, and for a while it was. But things went off the rails the moment 20-year-old Adam Lanza rolled out of bed. Instead of doing whatever he'd normally do in the morning, he grabbed a gun and went into his mother's room. Nancy Lanza was still lying in bed when he fired 4 rounds into her head. As messed up as that sounds, it's something that's happened before. In Tier 5, there's another case where the shooter started his killing spree at home too. After killing his mom, Adam gathered up her Bushmaster XM15 E2S, loaded 10 magazines, grabbed her car keys, and drove to Sandy Hook Elementary. He arrived just after 9:35 a.m., and since the front doors were locked, he made his entrance by firing through a glass panel. The morning announcements were still playing, which meant some kids heard that gunshot over the school intercom. Almost immediately, Principal Don Hawksprung and 2 staff members rushed into the hallway to see what was going on. They ran straight into him. Hawksprung and 1 staffer were killed on the spot, while the 3rd was shot in the leg, but she survived. From there, everything went downhill fast. Teachers scrambled to hide students under tables, in bathrooms and closets, anywhere that offered even a little cover. After the hallway encounter, Adam began working his way through classrooms. In one, he killed 2 teachers and 15 first graders almost instantly. Next, he entered Victoria Soto's first grade classroom. What happened here isn't completely clear since there are several conflicting accounts, but they all agreed on one thing. Soto tried to shield her students and was killed in the process, along with 5 children from her class. The shooting lasted only a few minutes. Adam fired 154 rounds, leaving 26 people dead. Police entered the school while he was still firing, but once he realized it was over, he didn't stick around to be taken in. Instead, he turned the gun on himself in the hallway outside Soto's classroom. Later, investigators learned he'd spent countless hours researching mass shootings like the Columbine High School Massacre and watching videos on suicide by gunshot. No matter how hard they tried, investigators could never pin down his motive or explain why he chose that school in particular. What they did uncover was that Adam had a long list of mental health struggles. He was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, depression, anxiety, and obsessive-compulsive disorder. But it's important to note that according to experts, none of these factors are responsible for his actions. Virginia Tech shooting. April 16, 2007 started like a normal Monday on the Virginia Tech campus. Students were dragging themselves to early classes, most running on too little sleep and bad coffee. Meanwhile, 23-year-old Sung Hui Cho, an English major with a long list of personal demons, had already mapped out how his day would end. At about 6:47 a.m., Cho was spotted loitering outside West Ambler Johnston Hall, a co-ed dorm that usually stayed locked to non-residents until later in the morning. Somehow, he managed to slip inside. By 7:15, he had made his way to the room of freshman Emily Hilscher. She was 19 and lived there with another student. Cho shot her. Then moments later, when resident assistant Ryan Clark rushed over to help, Cho shot and killed him too. Early reports claimed Cho shot Emily over some kind of romantic dispute, but her friends said that was impossible because they'd never even met. In Tier 2, there's a case where the shooter really did know his first victim, and they weren't just acquaintances. After the dorm attack, Cho went back to his own dorm in Harper Hall, cleaned himself up, changed out of his blood-stained clothes, and started wiping his tracks. He deleted emails, shut down his student account, and even removed his computer's hard drive. To the outside world, the shooting seemed like an isolated tragedy. Campus police were on alert, but classes carried on. Nobody knew that the tragedy was just getting started. At 9:01 a.m., Cho took a detour to the post office. He mailed a package of rambling notes and self-recorded videos to NBC News. The videos were his attempt at explaining himself, though most of it was incoherent rage. When that was done, he made his way to Norris Hall, an academic building across campus. By 9:40 a.m., he arrived at the building with 2 handguns, about 400 rounds of ammunition, a hammer, a knife, and chains to lock the doors. He chained all 3 main entrances shut and taped a fake note to one, claiming that opening it would trigger an explosion. With the building sealed, there was no way out. At 9:42 a.m., the shooting began. Cho stormed into classrooms, firing at professors and students without hesitation. In the first room alone, a professor and 9 students were killed, while 2 more were wounded. He moved quickly, clearing rooms, reloading, and continuing the assault. Within 10 minutes, police and a SWAT team reached the building. They couldn't use the main doors, but eventually forced entry through other points. When Cho heard them closing in, he walked into a classroom and shot himself in the head. The attack lasted 12 minutes. By the time it was over, 32 people were dead, 17 were wounded, and 6 more had been injured while jumping out of windows to escape. Investigators later found that Cho had been flagged as mentally unstable years before and was considered a danger to himself. Still, he was able to walk into a store and legally purchase the very weapons he later used in what's now recognized as one of the deadliest school shootings in U.S. history. Parkland High School shooting. At 2:19 p.m. on February 14, 2018, an Uber pulled up outside Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. Out stepped 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz, a former student carrying a backpack. Inside was an AR-15 style rifle and boxes of ammunition. School shooters returning to their old schools is more common than you'd think. In Tier 4, there's a guy who did the same thing, except he was 34. We'll get to him later. 2 minutes after he arrived, Cruz walked into Building 12. It was a 3-story structure with 30 classrooms and about 900 students inside that afternoon. He ducked behind a stairwell and started putting his rifle together. One student ran into him by accident, but instead of shooting, Cruz told him to leave. The kid didn't wait around. He bolted and warned staff there was a gunman in the building. But by then, Cruz was already moving through the halls. He opened fire in the first hallway, killing 3 students. He then started shooting into classroom windows, hitting more people. One of his bullets set off the fire alarm, and confusion spread as students began evacuating. At some point, Cruz moved from the first to the 3rd floor and continued firing into hallways and classrooms. The rampage lasted only 6 minutes, but in that time, he killed 17 people and wounded 18 more. When he was done, he dropped the rifle on the 3rd floor and slipped out of the building with fleeing students. He managed to escape unnoticed, but his freedom didn't last very long. At 3:41 p.m., police arrested him about 2 miles away. He was briefly taken to a hospital for labored breathing before being placed back in custody less than an hour later. On October 20, 2021, Cruz pleaded guilty to all charges and apologized for the shooting. The prosecution pushed for the death penalty, but the jury could not unanimously agree. In November 2022, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Robb Elementary School shooting. On the morning of May 24, 2022, 18-year-old Salvador Ramos got into a heated argument with his 66-year-old grandmother about him not graduating high school. It ended with him grabbing a gun and shooting her in the face. She survived thanks to neighbors who rushed to help, but Salvador wasn't finished. He took her car and left with something worse in mind. At around 11:28 a.m., he crashed the car into a ditch near Robb Elementary School, where he was a former student. Dressed in black clothing and a tactical vest, he climbed out carrying an AR-15-style rifle and a backpack loaded with 7 30-round magazines. He fired 2 shots at people outside a nearby funeral home, who managed to escape before jumping a fence and heading toward the school. He slipped in through a door that could only be locked from the outside, then moved down the hallways until he reached 2 adjoining 4th-grade classrooms, rooms 111 and 112. Inside, a teacher named Irma Garcia tried to protect her students by locking the door, but Salvador shot through the glass panel, pushed his way inside, and backed her into the room. He told her good night before killing her, then turned his gun on the students. One child later recalled seeing him smear the blood of his victims on the chalkboard and write the word LOL. The attack itself took minutes, but Salvador stayed barricaded in those classrooms for over an hour. Officers were on scene within 3 minutes, yet when they tried to move in, gunfire forced them back, and 2 of their men were hit. More and more law enforcement officers showed up, but instead of storming the room, they waited in the hallway. Outside, desperate parents begged them to act. Some tried to break through themselves, only to be tackled, pepper sprayed, and restrained. One mother managed to slip past the police, climb the fence, and rescue her kids on her own. It wasn't until 12:50 p.m., exactly 74 minutes after Salvador first entered, that a Border Patrol tactical team finally breached the classroom. In the brief gunfight that followed, Salvador was killed. By then, 19 children and 2 teachers were dead. 17 others were wounded. Police in Uvalde were heavily criticized for waiting outside while the children inside ran out of time. Tier 2. Dunblane Primary School shooting. At 9:30 a.m. on March 13, 1996, 43-year-old Thomas Hamilton pulled into the parking lot of Dunblane Primary School in Scotland. He parked near a telephone pole, cut the cables, and then walked toward the building. He entered the gym carrying 4 handguns and 743 rounds of ammunition. Inside, 28 kindergartners were in the middle of PE class with their teacher Gwen Mayer and 2 staff members. The moment Hamilton stepped in, he opened fire. Mayer was killed instantly, while the 2 staff members were badly wounded, but still managed to crawl into a cupboard with several injured children. Hamilton kept firing across the gym, and soon the noise drew an older student and another adult to the door. As they tried to look inside, Hamilton shot and wounded the student. He then moved into the hall and opened fire on the library cloakroom and a nearby mobile classroom. The children inside were already on the floor, and that's the reason they weren't hit. Hamilton eventually returned to the gym. He dropped 1 gun, picked up another, and turned it on himself. The attack only lasted about 5 minutes, but in that time, 16 children and 1 teacher were killed, while 15 others were injured. It remains the deadliest mass shooting in British history. In the aftermath, Dunblane residents launched a snowdrop campaign to push for tougher gun laws. By February 1997, the government had banned private ownership of handguns above .22 caliber, and later that year, all handguns were outlawed. École Polytechnique Massacre. December 6, 1989 started like a normal cold winter day in Montreal, but by nightfall the country was reeling from a massacre that specifically targeted women. At around 4 p.m., 25-year-old Marc Lepin walked into the École Polytechnique with a Ruger Mini-14 rifle and a hunting knife. He had bought the rifle legally weeks earlier, claiming it was for hunting small game. In reality, he had been preparing for this moment. He even visited the school several times in the week leading up to the attack. Once inside, he first went to the registrar's office on the second floor and sat in silence. When a staff member tried to speak to him, he ignored them, got up, and wandered through different parts of the building. At about 5:10 p.m., he entered a mechanical engineering classroom where around 60 people were listening to a student presentation. He interrupted the class, ordered everyone to stop what they were doing, and told the men and women to separate. At first, people thought it was a prank, but when he fired a shot into the ceiling, they realized it wasn't. Lepin then forced about 50 men to leave the room, leaving only the women behind. He told them he was fighting feminism. When one student protested that they weren't feminists, just students, he opened fire while shouting, "You are all feminists." 6 women were killed in that classroom, and 3 more were injured. Lepin then roamed the corridors, moving from floor to floor, looking for more women. In one classroom, he ordered the men out before shooting a woman giving a presentation. He sprayed bullets across the room, then stabbed a wounded student to death before turning the gun on himself. In just 20 minutes, 14 women were dead. 10 more people were wounded, including 4 men. Police later found a note in his jacket pocket. In it, Lepin blamed feminists for ruining his life, and even listed 19 prominent women he wanted dead, calling them radical feminists. In the days that followed, professors at the school launched a petition demanding tougher gun laws. That movement, along with public outrage, led to major reforms, including Bill C-17 in 1992 and the 1995 Firearms Act, which introduced stricter controls on firearms across Canada. University of Texas Tower Shooting. On August 1, 1966, students at the University of Texas started their Monday like any other. By midday, the campus was a war zone. The whole thing started earlier at around 12:30 a.m. when Charles Whitman, a 25-year-old Marine veteran, went to his mother's house and stabbed her to death with a bayonet. Then he returned home and stabbed his wife to death in her sleep. Next to their bodies, he left notes saying he loved them both, but claimed he murdered them to spare them from humiliation and suffering. By 9 a.m., Whitman was in a hardware store buying guns and stockpiling ammunition. He packed everything into a storage truck: rifles, shotguns, pistols, food, drugs, knives, 3.5 gallons of water, binoculars, lighter fluid, and rope. Then he loaded the trunk into his car and drove to the University of Texas at Austin. At about 11:25 a.m., he got past a campus guard with a fake ID, wheeled his supplies inside, and took the elevator to the 27th floor of the tower. From there, he carried the weapons up the last flight of stairs to the observation deck. Along the way, he bludgeoned the receptionist, shot 2 people dead, and left 2 more injured. At 11:48 a.m., Whitman stepped out onto the deck and opened fire from 70 meters above the ground. His first shots hit a pregnant student and her boyfriend who were at a mall below. Within minutes, he was firing at anyone in sight: students, shoppers, even people blocks away. Chaos spread across campus as ambulances rushed in and civilians tried to drag the wounded to safety. Police arrived quickly, but one officer was killed almost immediately by Whitman's fire. More officers followed, and with help from armed civilians, they laid down suppressive fire, forcing him to retreat behind a wall on the deck. That limited his line of sight, but he kept shooting whenever he found a target. Meanwhile, 3 police officers and a civilian armed with a rifle made their way up the tower. They didn't have a clear plan, but once they reached the 27th floor, they pushed forward and surrounded him. Whitman barely had time to react before they opened fire and killed him. The siege had lasted more than 90 minutes. By the time it ended, Whitman had killed 15 people, including the unborn child, and wounded 30 others. Red Lake Senior High School shooting. Most kids in Red Lake, Minnesota spent March 21, 2005 worrying about homework, basketball practice, or just regular kid stuff. But 16-year-old Jeff Weiss spent it stockpiling guns and preparing for what was to come. At about 2:47 p.m., he set his plan in motion. Jeff walked into his grandfather's bedroom with a .22 caliber Ruger pistol and shot the man 12 times as he slept. His grandfather, Darrell Lucier Sr., was a police officer, which meant Jeff now had access to far heavier firepower, specifically a .40 caliber Glock, a 12-gauge shotgun, a gun belt, and a bulletproof vest. Before leaving the house, he turned the gun on his grandfather's girlfriend, Michelle Sagana, and fired 2 shots to her head. Then he drove his grandfather's squad car to Red Lake Senior High School. The first to die there was the unarmed security guard at the front door. Another guard ran inside to warn the students and staff, and they immediately started locking doors, switching off lights, and barricading themselves inside classrooms. Sadly, none of those safety measures stopped Jeff from blasting through the glass panel and forcing his way into a classroom. The teacher inside was praying when Jeff shot him first. Then he turned to the students, demanding to know if they believed in God. Hesitation or a yes earned a bullet. One student, Jeffrey May, lunged at him with a pencil and bought his classmates time to escape. May took 3 bullets and nearly lost his life, but his brave attack kept the death toll in that room from climbing even higher. By the time Jeff walked out of there, 3 students and a teacher were dead. 5 others were bleeding. He hit another classroom, injuring 2 more, before circling back toward the entrance where police were already waiting. A shootout followed, and Jeff took 3 bullets. He retreated into a classroom, killed 1 teacher and 3 more students, then shot himself. The entire rampage lasted 9 minutes. When it ended, Jeff Weiss had murdered 7 people and injured 9 others. Santa Fe High School shooting. At 7:32 a.m. on May 18, 2018, the quiet at Santa Fe High School in Texas was shattered by the sound of gunfire. The shooter, 17-year-old student Dimitrios Pagortis, had come armed with a 12-gauge shotgun, a .38 caliber revolver, Molotov cocktails, and homemade explosives. He began his attack inside the school's art complex, a cluster of 4 connected classrooms. To get in, he shot through a door window, then opened fire on the people there. In the midst of the confusion, a staff member managed to pull the fire alarm, sending the rest of the school into evacuation mode. But the students trapped in the art rooms had nowhere to go. Pagortis was heard humming and even singing "Another One Bites the Dust" as he fired. Some students hid in a storage closet and tried to barricade the door, but he blasted through it with his shotgun. When he briefly left the room, they moved their barricade to the main classroom door instead, only for him to return moments later. He shoved the door open, looked at one student he knew, shouted "surprise," and shot him in the chest. By then, police were on the scene and exchanged gunfire with him. He wounded 1 officer but didn't give up. Instead, he argued with them between shots as they tried to talk him into surrendering. The standoff dragged on for 25 minutes until he was injured and finally gave himself up. The attack left 10 people dead and 13 others injured. Later, he told investigators that he had chosen his victims deliberately and spared others so that they could tell his story. Although he was charged with capital murder and aggravated assault on a police officer, Pagortis has never stood trial. In 2019, he was declared mentally unfit and sent to a psychiatric facility, where he's been ever since. As of January 2025, doctors still say he isn't mentally stable enough to face trial. Tier 3. Beslan School Siege. September 1, 2004 was supposed to be a celebration. In Russia, the first day of school was called Knowledge Day, and schools usually held ceremonies with students, parents, and relatives all gathered together. At school number 1 in Beslan, families packed the courtyard for the event, but by 9:11 a.m., everything had changed. Out of nowhere, a police van and a military truck rolled up, and armed men in camouflage jumped out. For a moment, people thought it might just be a security drill, but that illusion ended when the men fired shots into the air. There were about 32 attackers in total, and they quickly started forcing everyone toward the building. A few people managed to slip away and alert the authorities, while the rest were pushed inside. The militants had a brief exchange of fire with police, but within minutes, they had taken full control of the school. Once inside, the hostages, more than 1,000 in total, were crammed into the school gym. Phones were confiscated, and the entire room was rigged with explosives and tripwires. The attackers made it clear that one wrong move could kill everyone. They imposed strict rules. Everyone was ordered to speak Russian. When one man tried to communicate in another language, he was executed on the spot. Another was shot for refusing to kneel. Soon after, the attackers singled out 15 to 20 men who looked strong enough to resist. They were led away to another part of the school and killed, some by explosives and others by gunfire. Those left behind sat packed tightly together in the stifling gym, surrounded by bombs hanging from the ceiling. It was later revealed that the siege was carried out by Chechen militants led by Shamil Basayev, a known terrorist leader. Basayev claimed responsibility afterward, saying the entire siege had cost him only 8,000 euros. He also admitted that he'd originally planned to seize a school in Moscow or St. Petersburg, but settled for North Ossetia because it was cheaper. The attackers demanded that Russia withdraw all troops from Chechnya and recognize its independence at the United Nations. They also wanted North Ossetia's president, Alexander Zhashkov, Ingushetia's president, Murat Zyazikov, former president, Ruslan Ashev, and pediatrician Leonid Roshal to come to the school. If they didn't, the hostages wouldn't get food or water. Later reports said they also demanded the release of dozens of people arrested after earlier terrorist raids in Ingushetia, and even a resignation from President Putin himself. In addition to their demands, the militants made it clear that if Russian forces tried to storm the school, they would blow it up. If one of their members was killed, they promised to execute 50 hostages. If one was injured, 20 would die. By the second day, desperation had set in. The gym was unbearably hot, and children fainted in their parents' arms. Many were so thirsty they began to drink their own urine to survive. At one point, the attackers did agree to release 11 nursing mothers and 15 babies, but the rest remained trapped in the same horrible conditions. On the third day, the standoff came to a violent end. The attackers had allowed medical workers to come in and remove dead bodies, but at 1:03 p.m., just as workers reached the door, an explosion tore through the gym. Less than 30 seconds later, a second blast followed. Flames spread quickly as the roof caught fire and collapsed onto the crowd below. Panic broke out. Hostages ran for the exits while the militants opened fire. Russian special forces stormed the building and a full-scale battle erupted inside the school. By the time it was over, 334 people were dead, including 186 children, and hundreds more were injured. 31 attackers were killed, while only one survived. He was captured, charged with murder, terrorism, and kidnapping, and later sentenced to life in prison. Peshawar School Massacre. On the morning of December 16, 2014, 7 armed members of the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan stormed the Army Public School in Peshawar. The school sat inside a large compound, and that day, over 1,000 students and staff were inside. Around 10:30 a.m., the attackers scaled the walls to get in. They torched their van to create a diversion, then went straight for the auditorium carrying rifles, grenades, and suicide vests. Inside, a group of students were attending a first aid class when the shooting started. The attackers opened fire on everything they saw. Usually, in a terrorist attack, you'd expect demands or a hostage situation, but that wasn't the case here. These guys had strict orders to kill as many people as they could, and they were determined to see it through. Panic broke out as students and staff tried to escape. Many ran towards the 2 exits at the far end of the auditorium, but most never made it out. Others fled into the school garden, only to be gunned down there. Survivors later said the gunmen went from one classroom to another, targeting teachers and older students. Some reports say the children were forced to watch their teachers die, including the principal, Tahir Akazi, who was burned alive in front of them. The nature of the assault was so brutal and coordinated that journalists later compared it to the 2004 Beslan school siege in Russia. Both attacks showed the same kind of cold, military-style planning meant to cause maximum terror and loss of life. Within 15 minutes, commandos from Pakistan's Special Services Group, or SSG, reached the scene. A firefight broke out as the soldiers surrounded the compound and pinned the attackers inside. Snipers took positions on nearby rooftops while police sealed off the surrounding area. The militants tried to fight back and even dragged hostages into the administration block, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. After nearly 8 hours of gunfire, the siege was finally over. The authorities had managed to take down all the attackers before they could detonate their suicide vests, but the damage was already done. 149 people were dead. including 132 children, and about 100 more were injured. The Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan later claimed responsibility, calling it revenge for a military operation launched against them earlier that year. The next day, the Pakistani military struck back. Air raids hit the group's bases in the Tirah Valley, and in the days that followed, their hideouts were destroyed and many members were killed. The government called it justice, though for most people, no retaliation could ever balance what was lost that day. Garissa University College attack. At about 5:30 a.m. on April 2, 2015, armed men stormed Garissa University College in Kenya. They were members of Al-Shabaab, an Islamist militant group based in Somalia. They were monsters on a mission, and so they kicked things off by killing the 2 guards at the gate before forcing their way inside. Carrying AK-47s and suicide vests, the attackers stormed the hostels and took more than 700 students hostage. It soon became clear they were driven by extremist beliefs, as they separated the students by faith, killing those who identified as Christians and letting Muslims go. Survivors later said the gunmen forced people out of their rooms, made them lie face down, and then executed them on the spot. As word of the attack spread, the Kenya Defense Forces and other security agencies arrived and surrounded the school. For nearly 15 hours, security forces fought to drive the gunmen out. In the end, 4 attackers were shot dead, while another detonated his suicide vest, injuring some officers in the blast. When it was finally over, 148 people had been killed, including students, soldiers, and police officers. Another 79 were injured. Al-Shabaab later claimed responsibility. One spokesman said the attack targeted anyone opposed to the group. Another said the school was chosen because it stood on what they called Muslim land colonized by non-Muslims. Kerch Polytechnic College Massacre. Kerch Polytechnic College wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to make international news. But on October 17, 2018, it did. The whole thing started at around 10 a.m. when an 18-year-old student named Vladislav Roslyakov entered school premises with a shotgun. He had legally bought the gun on September 8, 2018, and just a few days before the attack, on October 13, he purchased about 150 rounds of ammunition. For more than 15 minutes, he roamed the halls going from one room to another, firing at both teachers and students. He also shot at doors, computers, and even fire extinguishers, almost like he was trying to cause as much chaos as possible. Then he set off a homemade bomb in the cafeteria. The device had been filled with metal objects, so when it exploded, shrapnel tore through the room, killing and injuring more people. Some survivors, however, later said they never saw a large bomb, and claimed he had been carrying grenades instead. Police did respond to the scene, but Vladislav never confronted them. He didn't run or put up a fight. Instead, he walked into the library and shot himself. By then, 19 people were dead, and more than 50 others were wounded. It later came out that the night before the massacre, he had burned a Bible, his phone, and other books. A friend said he hated his school, and had often talked about wanting revenge on his teachers. The school's surveillance cameras recorded the entire attack, and soon after, Russian media released pictures of him in black trousers and a white t-shirt with the word hatred written across it in Russian. His clothing looked strikingly similar to what Eric Harris wore during the Columbine high school shooting. Investigators also found that Vladislav was obsessed with serial killers. He spent time in online groups that discussed them, and was active in fan clubs for Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris, who he once said were awesome. Because of this, many believe his massacre was carried out as a copycat crime. The Kerch Polytechnic College massacre remains the deadliest school attack in Russia since the Beslan siege. Rio de Janeiro school shooting. April 7, 2011 started like any other school morning in Realengo, a working-class neighborhood in Rio de Janeiro. Students at Tasso da Silveira Municipal School were settling into class when a familiar face from the past walked through the gates. It was 23-year-old Wellington Menezes de Oliveira, a former student, dressed neatly, and claiming he was back to give a lecture. Nobody questioned him, and nobody knew the backpack he carried held 2 revolvers and enough ammunition for a massacre. He made his way to the first floor and walked straight into an 8th grade classroom. Without warning, Oliveira pulled out his guns and opened fire. Chaos broke out instantly. Children screamed, scrambled for cover, and tried to escape as bullets tore through the room. He singled out the girls, calling them impure beings, and executed many of them with shots to the head. The boys got their share of violence too. He shot several of them in the arms and legs, so they were left wounded but not dead. As the panic spread, students and teachers rushed to get out of the building. Some managed to escape, while others were trapped inside as Oliveira kept moving through the school. Police were called, and within minutes, officers arrived. One officer confronted him and shot him in the legs and stomach, sending him tumbling down a flight of stairs. Before he could be arrested, Oliveira turned his gun on himself. By the time it was over, 12 children, 10 girls and 2 boys between the ages of 12 and 14 were dead. At least 22 others were injured. Oliveira had left behind a letter, but instead of an explanation, it contained burial instructions. He asked to be laid near his adoptive mother, who had died 2 years earlier, and requested that his funeral follow Islamic rites. He begged God for forgiveness, but gave no reason for the attack. Investigations later revealed a darker side to him. He was obsessed with acts of terrorism, had spent years as a Jehovah's Witness before converting to Islam, and had grown increasingly fixated on violence in the years leading up to the shooting. Tier 4. Suzano Massacre. On the morning of March 13, 2019, 17-year-old Guilherme Tauchi Monteiro and 25-year-old Luis Henrique de Castro started their day at a car shop run by Guilherme's uncle. Without saying a word, they opened fire, shooting him 3 times. He would later die in the hospital, but that wasn't their final target. It was only the beginning. Roughly 40 minutes later, by 9:40 a.m., the two pulled up to the Professor Raul Brasil State School in Suzano in a rented white Chevrolet Onyx. They were dressed in black with combat boots and ski masks, and they carried enough weapons to look like they were going to war. Their arsenal included a .38 revolver, a hatchet, knives, Molotov cocktails, and even crossbows. Both had once been students there, which may be why they had targeted the school. The first to die were 2 staff members and some students near the entrance. Inside, the school had about 1,000 students, and as the shots rang out, panic spread instantly. Children screamed and scattered. Some ran for the exits, while others crammed themselves into corners, hoping the attackers wouldn't find them. Henrique at one point cornered a female student, but she managed to break free and escape. For the next several minutes, the two tore through the school. By the time it was over, 5 students and 2 teachers had been killed, and 11 more were injured. Then, in a turn of events no one saw coming, Guilherme turned his gun on Henrique and shot him before killing himself. The motive never became clear, but investigators found the pair shared a disturbing connection. Both were active on Dogolahan, an underground image board known for glorifying violence and terrorism. They idolized the Columbine shooters, planned their own attack for over a year, and wanted the same level of notoriety. In Brazil, where violence usually comes from gangs and the streets, school shootings were almost unheard of, which is why Suzano hit so hard. It was the second deadliest school shooting in Brazil at the time, and it ended up inspiring copycat attempts in Brazil, Mexico, and the United States. Izhevsk school shooting. September 26, 2022 started out like any other morning at school number 88 in Izhevsk, a city in Russia's Udmurtia region. Kids were in their classrooms, teachers were already running lessons, and nothing seemed out of place until 10:52 a.m. That was when 34-year-old Artyom Kazantsev, a former student of the school, walked through the doors. He wore a balaclava and a black t-shirt with a Nazi symbol printed on it. He carried 2 pistols and plenty of ammunition. His first victims were a security guard, a cloakroom attendant, and a cleaner who just happened to be near the entrance when he started shooting. From there, he moved down the hallway and opened fire into a room, killing 1 teacher and 3 first graders. Before heading upstairs, he planted a baby monitor so he could listen for the police. When he reached the 2nd floor, he ran into another guard. The guard managed to raise an alarm, but Kazantsev shot him before he could do anything else. He then started roaming the building floor by floor, targeting classrooms. Survivors later told authorities that in one room, all the children were hiding under their desks. Kazantsev stormed in, shouted, "Bastards, where are you?" and stormed out again when he didn't see anyone. On the 4th floor, he killed 4 more students and another teacher before finally turning a gun on himself inside a classroom. By the time it was over, 18 people were dead and 23 were wounded. The victims included 11 children between the ages of 7 and 15, along with teachers, guards, and staff. 11 of the injured children were left permanently disabled, and one person was paralyzed and badly wounded. The investigation revealed that Kazantsev had long struggled with schizophrenia and was registered as an outpatient at a local psychiatric clinic. Authorities also found an email he had written 20 minutes before the attack, insisting it was not an act of terrorism. What really stood out, though, was that police found keychains on him honoring Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, the Columbine shooters he looked up to. Kauhajoki school shooting. On September 23, 2008, the Seinäjoki University of Applied Sciences in Kauhajoki, Finland, turned into a crime scene. That morning, 22-year-old student Matti Juhani Sari came in through the basement dressed in black, wearing a leather jacket and a ski mask. He carried a .22 caliber Walther P22 pistol and a bag of homemade Molotov cocktails. Witnesses said he didn't look nervous at all, which is unsettling given why he was there. Sari walked into a classroom where about 20 students were taking a business studies exam and opened fire without warning. He didn't stay in one spot. Instead, he paced the room, shooting victims one by one at close range. After a few minutes, he stepped into the hallway to reload. When a teacher tried to block him from re-entering the classroom, Sari shot and killed him. Inside, 9 students were already dead. Sari then poured a flammable liquid around the classroom and set it alight. The blaze was so intense that several bodies were burned beyond recognition. He went on to throw a Molotov cocktail into a lab, shoot out windows, and start more fires while students tried to escape by crawling under desks or climbing through doors and windows. Police got to the school around 11 a.m., but Sari opened fire and kept them from coming in. More officers showed up before noon, but they couldn't get inside because of the heavy black smoke spreading through the building. Firefighters tried attacking the flames from outside, while panicked students focused on getting out however they could. At 11:53, in the middle of the chaos, Sari called a friend. He calmly admitted he was behind the shooting and just wanted to say goodbye. By the time police finally found him, he had turned the gun on himself. He was still alive when they pulled him out and rushed him to Tampere University Hospital, but he died later from his injuries. A total of 10 people died in the shooting, and 11 more were injured. In Sari's dorm room, investigators discovered 2 handwritten notes where he vented hatred for humanity and revealed he had been planning the attack for 6 years. The shooting shook Finland. The government declared a national day of mourning and began reviewing the country's gun laws, while the public demanded tougher measures, like health screenings for anyone seeking a license. Umpqua Community College shooting. Thursday, October 1, 2015, began like any other morning at Umpqua Community College in Oregon. But that calm didn't last long. At around 10:30 a.m., 26-year-old student Chris Harper Mercer walked into classroom 15 wearing black clothes and a bulletproof vest. Inside, an English class was underway when he fired his first shot. By 10:38, someone had already called 911 to report an active shooter in Snyder Hall. Witnesses said Harper Mercer ordered everyone to the floor, then pulled one student aside, calling them the lucky one. He placed them at the back of the room, forcing them to sit and watch, and told them that their job was to deliver a package to the police once it was over. From there, things only got darker. Mercer ordered a woman who had crawled from her wheelchair to the floor to climb back into it. While she was still struggling, he shot her. With a Glock 19 in one hand and a Taurus PT 24/7 in the other, he moved through the room, firing as he asked students about their religion. Their answers didn't matter because he shot them either way. At one point, he handed the package to the student he had spared and reminded them of their task. Then, at 10:44, only 6 minutes after the first 911 call, 2 officers arrived outside Snyder Hall. Mercer stepped into the hallway, reloaded his gun, and traded fire with them. After taking a bullet to the side, he stumbled back into the classroom and killed himself with a headshot. When it was over, 9 students and 1 professor were dead, and at least 7 more were injured. Police recovered 6 guns and ammunition at the school, and later found 8 more firearms at home. The package Harper Mercer left behind contained writings where he raged about being a virgin with no friends, no girlfriend, and no job. He also praised Elliot Rodger, who had carried out the 2014 Isla Vista killings. His mother, Laurel Harper, later told police in an interview that her son had been born angry and often spent hours of watching videos of mass killings online. Tier 5. Thurston High School shooting. On May 20, 1998, 15-year-old Kip Kinkle, A freshman at Thurston High School in Oregon got himself caught with a stolen handgun. The mess started when one of his friends stole the gun from another kid's dad and tried to sell it for quick cash. Somehow, the gun ended up stuffed inside a paper bag inside Kip's locker. The gun's real owner eventually noticed it was missing and called the police. He had a list of suspects, though Kip wasn't even on it. But once the school started asking questions, Kip's name came up. Staff searched his locker, found the handgun, and immediately suspended him while planning an expulsion hearing. While all that was going on, he and his friend were taken to the police station. His father picked him up and warned him that if things kept going downhill, military school would be his next stop. That afternoon, Kip decided to take things in the worst direction possible. Around 3 p.m., he grabbed his Ruger .22 caliber semi-automatic rifle and shot his father in the back of the head. He dragged the body into the bathroom and covered it up. A few hours later, at 6:30 p.m., his mother came home. He shot her 6 times, dragged her body inside, and covered it as well. By the next morning, May 21st, Kip was loaded for phase 2 of his very diabolical plan. He packed a rifle, a Ruger .22 pistol, a Glock 9mm, hunting knives, and more than 1,000 rounds of ammunition. Wearing a trench coat to hide the weapons, he drove his mother's car back to Thurston High. The shooting started outside. He fired 2 rounds, killing 1 student and injuring another. Then he moved into the cafeteria, where kids were eating breakfast, and sprayed the place with rifle fire. He burned through 48 more rounds, leaving 1 student dead and 24 others wounded. When his rifle finally ran dry, he fumbled to reload. That gave a wounded student named Jacob Riker and others a chance to tackle him. Kip pulled another gun and shot Riker again along with another student, but they still managed to pin him down. He begged them to kill him, but they ignored his request and just held him until the police arrived. In the end, 2 students were dead and 25 others were injured. When police searched his home, they found his parents' bodies and got the full picture of what had happened. Later evaluations revealed a heavy history of mental illness in his family. Kip himself had major depressive disorder and claimed he heard voices pushing him toward violence. He was eventually diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. At 15, he pleaded guilty to murder and attempted murder and was sentenced to more than 111 years in prison with no chance of parole. Westside Middle School shooting. March 24, 1998 started off like any other Tuesday in Jonesboro, Arkansas. Kids were in class, teachers were mid-lesson, and nobody suspected that 2 students had already set the stage for a massacre. The night before, 13-year-old Mitchell Johnson and 11-year-old Andrew Golden had raided Golden's grandfather's house. They took 9 guns and 2,000 rounds of ammunition, then packed it all into Johnson's mother's Dodge Caravan. Alongside the firepower, they threw in camping gear and snacks. Their plan was in 2 phases, and phase 2 was to vanish afterward. On the morning of the attack, they intentionally skipped the school bus and drove the loaded van to campus. By lunchtime, they were ready. At 12:30 p.m., Golden pulled the school fire alarm, while Johnson carried their weapons into the woods just outside school grounds. Golden quickly joined him there. When the alarm went off, students and teachers filed out of the building like it was a normal drill. It wasn't. By 12:41 p.m., the 2 boys opened fire from the tree line. At first, some thought it was a prank or some kind of simulation, but the reality set in fast as people started dropping. In just a few minutes, 4 students were gunned down, and a teacher died using herself as a human shield to protect a wounded child. 9 more kids and another teacher were injured before the shooting stopped. The whole thing lasted only minutes. Golden and Johnson tried to flee toward their getaway car, but police caught them almost immediately. Both were charged with 5 counts of capital murder and 10 counts of first-degree battery. Oddly enough, the 2 weren't even close friends. They sat together on the bus, but in school they barely crossed paths. Johnson was known as a hothead who got suspended often, while Golden was the well-mannered, cheerful kid teachers liked. They couldn't have been more different in character, yet their shared taste for violence gave them all the common ground they needed. Because of their ages, Arkansas law prevented the 2 boys from being tried as adults. The maximum penalty was juvenile detention until their 21st birthdays, and that's exactly what they got. Winnenden school shooting. On March 11, 2009, a 17-year-old former student named Tim Kretschmer returned to Albertville Realschule in Winnenden. He was wearing black and carrying a 9mm Beretta pistol that he had taken from his parents. At 9:30 a.m., he headed straight for classroom 9C and shot 5 students at point-blank range. Next, he stepped into classroom 10D, where a German lesson was underway, and opened fire, killing 2 people and leaving 9 others injured. When he left to reload, the teacher locked the door and kept him out. So Kretschmer went to the chemistry lab instead and shot the teacher there. While Tim was busy shooting up the school, the headmaster announced a coded message to alert teachers of the shooter, and a student managed to call the police. Officers arrived within minutes, but Kretschmer fired at them as he escaped the building. On his way out, he killed 2 more teachers in the hallway, bringing his total inside the school to 12. Still, he wasn't done. A short distance away, he shot a groundskeeper outside a psychiatric hospital, then hijacked a car and forced the driver to head towards Winnenden, which is about 25 miles from Winnenden. Along the way, he told the driver he had carried out the attack for fun, while he was calmly reloading his gun in the passenger seat. When the driver spotted a police patrol ahead, he stopped the car and ran. Kretschmer went the other way and forced his way into a car dealership, where he killed a salesman and a customer. Police closed in on him and he fired back, injuring 2 officers, but he took bullets in both legs. With nowhere left to run, he turned the gun on himself and pulled the trigger. By the time it was over, 15 people were dead, and 9 others were wounded. Investigators never found a clear motive, though most of his victims at the school were women. They did learn he'd been struggling with depression and had even told his psychiatrist that his violent urges were getting worse. That's the school shootings iceberg. Some of these attacks are well known, others barely get mentioned, but together they show just how many times schools have been turned into places of horror. This isn't fiction. These were real people whose lives were cut short.